So what are you going to do about it? That phrase sounds a little bit like someone's about to start a fight, but it could also be a question that, if we understand it clearly, could guide our life and actually guide our purpose. And we are living in times of great conflict, and we are living in a time of great solutions. And we're living in a time when we need to ask ourselves, what are we going to do about it? And the times are a little bit crazy. I mean, a few weeks ago, pundits labeled the voters double haters because they didn't like either candidate for president. Then, a week later, we have a debate performance with President Biden, and everybody says he has to go. Then we have an assassination attempt on former President Trump. Then President Biden steps down, and he's allowed Vice President Harris to be the nominee for the Democratic Party. And this is just over the last month. We have many months to go in this election cycle, and it's pretty chaotic, it's pretty crazy. If you wrote this script for a movie, you'd get dismissed. People would say that's too out there. Unless you wrote it for HBO's The Veep, which if you did, then you'd be considered prescient, because if you've ever watched that show, it predicts all of this. So with 3 months left in this election cycle, we can expect more chaos, more conflict, and we've got a lot of contempt baked into our culture. So anything can happen. And I will say that in the political season, most of the conversations that I have in DC, because DC is a very political city, people are sort of armchair quarterbacking. They're basically talking about what this person should do, what this person shouldn't do, and everybody sort of, as the election gets closer, I don't know if you know, but people sort of become pundits. And what I've noticed is we've sort of become a culture of spectators. We are watching these events take place, we're commenting as if our comments are really affecting the game on the field, and we've become a nation of spectators. But that's not how we were created by God to be. We are created by God to be actors. We are created by God to be game changers for good. Last week we had a lovely sermon message by Jim Robinson. He had two really interesting points, I thought, that are worth repeating. One, he said, if you remember, he talked about the acorn, and he said, we are all imprinted with a divine purpose of tremendous potential. And the other thing he said is that our earthly existence is like a training gym for our souls. Couldn't agree with him more. The problem is we can't really tap into our potential if we're sitting on the sidelines watching. We can't really work out our souls if we're watching videos of people working out at the gym and not going ourselves. So this culture of consumerism that we're in, baked into now, has really pushed us from asking the question, so what can we do? What can we do about it? Well, what can we do about it? Well, this week is the last of the 15 commitments from a book called 15 Commitments of Conscious Leaders that I've been preaching on in a series. And so this will be the conclusion of the series and conclusion of the book. And it's a pretty powerful commitment. It says, I commit to being the solution or resolution to what is needed, seeing what is missing in the world as an invitation to become that which is required. What is God inviting me to be or to become in this moment related to what I perceive as is missing? And it flips it by saying, when we fail to follow this commitment, we operate with this mindset. I commit to responding to the needs of the world with apathy or resentment and doing nothing, or assigning blame to others. And when you hear those two, which one sounds more familiar to you? My experience is that most of us are engaged in the second one. We're mostly talking about things that are happening rather than being engaged. We're a little apathetic, a little resentful, and a little bit of blaming. So what does it take to get beyond being a spectator to being the solution. How do we make this the shift? And from the reading from Swedenborg today, we begin it by adjusting our love. What is our motivation? What are we trying to do? It starts within us. And it continues by having courage in prayer. The prayer of St. Francis that we had as a song at the beginning today is a good example. It's, make me an instrument of your peace. That's a very powerful prayer. When we ask God to do that, things will change in our life. When we pray in the Lord's Prayer, thy will be done, that's also a very powerful prayer. If we take it seriously and we believe it, things will happen in our life to lead us to our purpose, and that's when it will require a little bit of courage. I thought it was interesting to think about, so who's done this? Like who has followed their purpose? Who's followed their, who's become the solution to the problem in their life? And I thought in the Old Testament, David is a young guy, and he basically has one skill set, and that is that he has a slingshot, and he protects sheep. And he thinks he can take on the big giant Goliath, who's across from him. So he steps up and does it. We read that story where he does, and we know that David very famously kills Goliath. But he just steps up. He says, let me be the solution. I also think very often of the prophet Isaiah, who God is saying, I need someone to go to the people of Israel. And he says, send me. So he steps up and has the courage to do that. And then in the other reading today was Jesus' miracle at Cana. And what happens there is he hasn't done any miracles yet. And his mother says, solve the wine problem at the wedding. And he pushes back and says, I'm not ready yet. That's not why I'm here for. But she essentially says, you need to be the solution to the problem now. And so he does. That's his first miracle. So it's what's interesting to me in all those stories, David, Isaiah, and Jesus, is they all do one small thing. Okay? They see a problem, and they do one small thing. They just take one step forward. It starts with a slingshot, a jar of wine, or just saying, send me. And then I thought, well, throughout history, there have been people who have seen the problem of the moment that they're in and said, okay, what do I do about it? How can I be the solution? Mahatma Gandhi's first public solution happened as a young man on a train ride to Pretoria, and he was sitting in his first class seat, and another gentleman got in with him and started screaming, I'm not going to be with this colored man. Get him out of here. And they threw Gandhi out onto the platform with his bags after purchasing the first class ticket. And he says, in that moment, I said, I'm going to fight these injustices. One small little event goes on to transform world history. Interestingly, another young man, only 26 years old, Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., is just the new pastor at the Dexter Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama. And he says, look, folks, we have to be educated on civic life. Holds meetings in the basement of the church. People in the meetings are debating whether to have a boycott of the subway, of the bus system. And it seems like he's not necessarily thinks it's a good idea, isn't sure, but lo and behold, he steps up. I'll be the solution. And he ends up running the boycott at 26 years old. And from that, only a few years later, he will leave Alabama and become the leader of the civil rights movement. We know the trajectory of his life, but it started with a meeting in a basement of the church. 2 days after Hitler took power, a young 27-year-old German minister broadcast a radio address critical of Christian nationalism in Germany, and he talked about the cult that was emerging. And he even called the Führer, which means leader, the misleader, the misführer. And he asked Christians, quote, see the great events of the world from the perspective of the outcast, the suspects, maltreated, the powerless, the oppressed, the reviled. In short, from the position of those who suffer. A short time after speaking, his radio broadcast was shut down. And he would then, a couple of years later, go to the United States to teach theology, and within 1 year decide, nope, I got to go back. I got to go back to Germany. And you probably know that he then leads the efforts to oppose Hitler. His family leads the effort to assassinate Hitler. He's eventually arrested, and he's executed weeks before the Allies liberated his camp. Harriet Tubman was a slave not too far from the DC Church on the eastern shores of Maryland, and she was a slave. She learned that she was going to be sold, and while being a slave, she had become friends with a number of sailors who had been on the eastern shore, and she kept quizzing them about how the land laid and how Maryland was laid out. So at just 26 years old, she says, okay, I'm going to plot. This is where I can make a move to Philadelphia with her two brothers. So she does. She plans her escape. News comes that they're being hunted down, and her two brothers turn themselves back in. But she has a spiritual vision that she'll be free, and she continues to freedom. Again, someone who chose to be the solution, because the last thing that you want to do is go back. But she goes back to rescue hundreds of fugitive slaves and gets the nickname Moses as she liberates them through the Underground Railroad system. She becomes the solution. And then I thought about Susan B. Anthony, who had spent her young years in justice causes of all different kinds. But at 52, she is furious that women can't vote. So she decides, I'm going to vote in the next election. She votes, and she's arrested. And after a very widely publicized trial, she's convicted of crimes for voting as a woman. And her response is that she refuses to pay the fines. And at this point, those who oppose her have had enough of her publicity, and they let her off. And just 6 years later, she drafts what becomes the 19th Amendment for women having the right to vote. And then 2 years after that, it becomes law. And so again, what I'm struck by all these people that we admire through history at various places, just like one moment where they said, okay, I'll be the solution. I'm not going to be a spectator. I'm not going to blame others. I'm going to step up. I'm going to have faith. Each were inspired by their faith, and each took great risks. So how about all of us? A few of us that I know of right now are being faced with, taking on Hitler or the British Empire or the Confederacy. Few of us are in that role, but we are all faced with a need for solutions wherever we are. There's something going on around us right now in our life, in our public life, in the world that we see, where we can see there needs to be a solution here. We're kind of hoping maybe somebody else would do it. But the reality is that the solution will only come through us. God works through human beings on this planet for change. God works very dramatically and very powerfully. There's all kinds of support, angelic support, but we have to say that we want to be the solution. So as I wrap up my 8 years at this little community, Church of the Holy City, my goodness, we've been through a lot in 8 years. And I just know that in the 8 years, I've just seen people at various times say, I'll be the solution. I'll be the solution. Do you need a board member? I can do that. Do you need a board chair? I can do that. I'm pretty busy this Sunday, but I think Rich needs me there for the worship, just for others to show up. I'll be there. The building, it needs a manager. I'll do that. We need a business plan. I can write a business plan. I'll do that. I need the community's prayers. I can do that. We need a reader. We need a preacher. I'll do it. Our church community is a story of people seeing a need and stepping up. I'll do it. I'll be the solution. This is very powerful work that we're doing. It may seem small in some ways, and we don't know the impact it will all have, but we live in a culture that's sitting on the sidelines right now, watching, complaining and judging. And then we wonder why we're so lonely. Teddy Roosevelt gave a great speech. I used to have this speech printed out over my desk. I was so inspired by it, but I don't know if you've ever heard it, but I'll just read a little tiny bit of it. He says, it's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong person stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done better. The credit belongs to the person who's actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes up short again and again. But there is no effort without error and shortcomings. But who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows the great enthusiasm and the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if failed, at least knows while daring greatly, so that their place shall never be those with the cold, timid souls who never know victory nor defeat. I love it. Get off of the sideline, get into the arena. So what are practical ways we can do it? I've mentioned that we can just simply pray, Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. I'm ready to kind of be open to what it is. Where do you need me? That's how it starts. It takes courage and prayer. And there's some practical steps that came in that book that I have been recommending, these 15 Habits of Conscious Leaders. And I'll share the 5 steps that they came up with, because I know this group always likes practical things. Like what do we do? So this is what they share. You can see if it's helpful. 1, it says, place your attention on your world, at work or at home, and then allow for something that's missing to come to your attention. What would be more efficient? What would be more aligned? What would be more productive, more beautiful? How could the world be more connected? Remember that missing does not mean lacking or it's a problem. It's just what's missing. That's step 1. Step 2, you can ask yourself, is there an invitation for what's missing? An invitation, not an obligation or some kind of responsibility. We're free to accept or reject the invitation. But the invitation is to be and become something or someone that responds to what is missing. It's an invitation to grow and expand yourself. Step 3, do you feel a whole body yes to it? Can you accept that invitation? If not, it's not your invitation. But if yes, take step 4. It says take some deep breaths, drop into your center, and with curiosity ask, what is God inviting me to do or become in this moment related to what I perceive as missing? Listen for God's answer. And then step 5, embody the invitation. What does it feel like physically and energetically? How does your breath change? How do you think differently? What behaviors do you need to change? If an action's required, what action do you need to take? I thought those were very practical steps that we could all think about. And we can put them into the newsletter too. But it's a nice meditation for thinking about what's missing in the world where I could be a solution for good. You may remember a quote from President Obama who said, change will not come if we wait for some other person or some other time. We are the ones we've been waiting for. We are the change that we seek. And that quote was taken largely from a Gandhi quote, except if you study Gandhi quotes online in any depth, you'll discover most Gandhi quotes are not Gandhi quotes. And most quotes are not real quotes. You may have heard, be the change you wish to see in the world. I've always learned that was a Gandhi quote. You'll see it on a million t-shirts, cards, so forth. But it wasn't a Gandhi quote. But it's taken from something he said that I think is even more interesting. So I want to read it because it really fits also with Swedenborgian theology. It says, we but mirror the world. All the tendencies present in the outer world are found in the world of our body. If we could change ourselves, the tendencies in the world would also change. A person changes their own nature, so does the attitude of the world change toward them. This is the divine mystery. A wonderful thing it is and a source of our happiness. We do not need to wait to see what others do. What a great quote. So we are the solution to the problems. We began this whole 15 steps. The first one, if you remember, was taking 100% responsibility for your life. And this puts it back on us. We have a tendency to always look, why aren't they doing that? Those bad people over there are doing that. They should be doing this. And we're reminded that we need to take 100% responsibility for our lives. And we need to say to God, how can we be the solution? We don't need to wait for anyone else. We don't need to blame anyone else. We can be the solution. So let us ask for God's strength, courage, and clarity as each of us become a solution in the world today. Amen.